I'll see if I can. Yeah, and some of you, on our website, it's called Reflections on Revelation, and I have about 5 videos that explain, one of them explains chapter 12, one of them explains chapter 13. It's about an hour long. A real page turner, isn't it, Jack? Those are the introduction to it. But if you go and look at the other ones, they're 50 plus minutes long. But it's more in depth. A lot of visuals so that you can look at it, see what I'm, especially the verses, so that you can look at it and take some time to bring it all. Now, if you're going to make a comment from back there, make sure that you speak up. Some of us do not have very good hearing. Some of us don't have good hearing and still don't wear your hearing aids. Shame on you. You should be wearing your hearing aids if you have them. What? That's what I said. Or at least get one of those metal horns. So, if you do speak up have a comment to make sure you say it loud enough that everyone can hear. It's important because I want to hear what you have to say. Maybe something I haven't thought of, and that's pretty true. Just a brief review. Chapter 1 is the introduction. It's the letter to the 7 churches. Always remember, this book of Revelation is not written primarily to us. It was written to the 7 churches. Why is that important? Ask yourself that. And of things which must shortly take place. It's very important. I began to read a commentary on a fellow who wrote about the book of Revelation, and in verse 1, never mentioned the fact that things which must shortly take place. Never mentioned it. If you don't get that, you're headed perhaps down a wrong path, because it needs to be understood by these people in the 7 churches. Must be understood by them because it's written to them. Does that mean we shouldn't pay any attention to it? No. But it was primarily written to them. Chapter 2 and 3 is the letters to each of the 7 churches, the good, the bad, and the unacceptable. And for 5 out of the 7, it tells them, repent. But to every one of them, it says to overcome, become Nikeo, to be victors in this. And if you do overcome, each of them is giving something that they will be rewarded with, and we are part of that too if we overcome. Chapters 4 and 5, we have this scene in heaven, and it shows us the glory of God, and also shows us the Lamb. And it's asked, there's a scroll. And John begins to cry because no one is found worthy to open that scroll, till they show the Lamb is worthy to open the scroll. And the scroll is really just a representation of the future. Only God knows the future. I don't know what's going to happen in 10 seconds. See, I didn't know that was going to happen. Chapter 6, we have the 6 seals open, revealing the future judgment. The first 4 are grouped together with the 4 horsemen. The martyrs are told to wait in the 5th seal, and the great day of God's wrath has come upon Jerusalem. That is the 6th seal. We aren't shown the 7th seal immediately. Each time we come to the 7th, whether it's the seal, the trumpet, or the bowl, there's always an interruption when we get to the 7th one, except we get the 7th bowl. Chapter 7, we have the 144,000 sealed, and they are the ones coming out of the Great Tribulation. And when is the Great Tribulation? It's already happened. Jesus said this generation shall not pass away until all these things take place. And one of those things was the Great Tribulation. Does that mean we will not have tribulations? No, it does not mean that. We will have our trials, we will have our tribulations, we will have our persecutions. Paul said that all who choose to have a godly life will suffer persecution. So we can expect that. But there was only one great tribulation, and that's why this book is written to them. Chapters 8 and 9, the 7 trumpets are introduced. They are partial judgments to bring them to repentance. And we read in chapters 9, verses 20 and 21, it says, and they did not repent. They're only partial, only 1/3 or 1/4 comes upon them. The scroll is sealed up in chapter 10, verses 1 through 4. Another angel from Daniel, the same angel from Daniel chapter 12, verse 7. In Daniel chapter 12, verse 7, he's told to wait. This is for some time in the future. This is for, as we say, it's for down the road a ways. But here in chapter 10, he says, no more delays. So if Daniel is told that this is for some time in the future, and that's 500 years, and here in Revelation chapter 10 it says no more delays, when could we expect that to happen? Soon. Soon. Okay, so we get a time frame. There's a time stamp in there. And John is told, we're told that the mystery is finished. The mystery was that the Gentiles would be part of the church. That mystery, that is finished. Remember that Paul said that the gospel had been preached to the entire world in Colossians chapter 1, twice. In Colossians chapter 1, he says the gospel has been preached to the whole world. That's important to remember because when you consider that they had to go to all of these places where the synagogues were, that Jews were, they had to be given that chance to hear the gospel. But now the gospel's gone to the whole world, and he says the mystery is finished, and John is told he has to prophesy to many peoples, nations, tongues, and kings. When it talks about peoples, nations, tongues, and kings, you're talking, including the Jews, but it's primarily talking about preaching to the Gentiles, to the nations. Chapter 11, the temple is measured, outside court is given to the Gentiles. This is the destruction of Jerusalem. Chapters 6 through 11 is talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. After that, we're dealing with the nations. We're dealing with the Roman government. We're dealing with the false prophet, and we're going to deal with Satan and his destruction. Temple is measured. The two witnesses, the law and the prophets, prophesy, and a great slaughter takes place. Those who slaughter rejoice over the dead, but the dead come back. The seventh angel sounds, signifying the kingdom of God. The church now reigns outright. The Jews have been destroyed. The first woe, destruction of Jerusalem, is past. That's a lot to take in. Chapter 12, we're introduced to the next scene. The woman, which are the people of God, brings forth the male child, Christ. He's caught up to heaven and begins to rule. And when was Christ caught up into heaven and beginning to rule? This is so important to realize, because there are people who teach that Christ is not ruling. We're waiting for him to come back and reign. Is Jesus ruling on the throne now? How do we know this? He ascended into heaven and he's sitting at the right hand of God. All authority, everything is under his control. Over and over, it tells us in the New Testament, he is reigning. A little side note, if Jesus is reigning, you ask the question, are we reigning too? This is yes. Yes, we are reigning. You may not feel like you're reigning, but we are reigning. Because we are told when Christ reigns, we reign. Chapter 13 begins where chapter 12 leaves off, how Satan makes war against Christians. Then he goes off to make war against the saints. And that's where we are. When he begins to make war on the saints, we're talking about the first century. There's a time stamp here. He's going off to make war against the saints. Okay, right there. Again, chapters 6 through 11 deal with the judgment on Jerusalem and Jews. Chapters 12 through 20 deal primarily with the judgment again, and in the reverse of what they're introduced, Rome, the false prophet, and the dragon. And the dragon is Satan. Okay. So, here's the last verse of chapter 12, and I'm going to skip over many verses until I get to the next part. And the dragon was enraged with the woman. He went to make war against the rest of her offspring who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. And that's where we are in the first century. He's making war against the saints. Okay. There we are. Okay. We've come across the first beast, and the first beast is identified as Rome. And we looked at verses from Daniel chapter 7, and Daniel chapter 7 laid right alongside Revelation chapter 12 has the identical markings. It has the 10 horns. It has the 7 crowns on it. And we are not talking about something that is the Antichrist. We're going to, everybody have a clear picture of what the Antichrist is? Because there's a lot of what Hollywood says the Antichrist. We're still waiting for the Antichrist. And some people say, when we get to this section of chapter 13, they're talking about the Antichrist. Remember, we were still in the first century. And was the Antichrist, the spirit of the Antichrist, alive in the first century? Yeah, how do we know that? Oh, we just made it up, so we don't have to do it now. No, John says he mentions the Antichrist 5 times in 1st and 2nd John. And he says the spirit of Christ is alive right now in the first century. And has been. Anybody that says that Jesus Christ did not come in the flesh, and he's really talking, if you know your history, he's talking about the Gnostics. And the Gnostic says, oh, we are so much better because we have a God-given knowledge, and you don't have the knowledge, but God has given me the knowledge. Gnostic, gnosos, knowledge. Okay, that was alive. That was beginning to show rear its ugly head. Paul is also, and we might get to that, Paul is also going to talk about this man of sin in Thessalonians. And people keep pointing to that and say, oh yes, they were waiting for that man of sin. Guess what Paul says about the man of sin? He's already there in the first century. So people, I don't know how people can miss this, but Antichrist, the spirit of the first century, so is that man that Paul talks about. And he has a remarkable resemblance to what we're going to read in chapter 13. Oh, remember, the dragon raged, he went off to make war with the rest of her offspring. And that's what we're being described. How is Satan making war with the saints? And what is he using? Well, we're going to find out. Who did Satan give the power to? Rome. That's how Rome has gotten its power. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. He who leads into captivity shall go into captivity. That's where we left off last week. He who kills with a sword must be killed with a sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. Remember, if we go back to we'll go back chronologically that way and forward that way. Back in chapter 7, we're told that they were sealed. When they were sealed in chapter 7, did that mean no one was going to get hurt and neither the Jews nor Rome nor Satan could touch them? They were going to come through with unscathed, unhurt. Is that what it means? No. God is telling them, I know who you are. You're mine. And Satan cannot take you. Remember, we were told, Jesus says, Satan can't take us away. If we're with Christ, we are with him. He cannot overpower us. Okay? But he says, if anyone has an ear, let him hear. And if you're going to go into captivity, you're going to go into captivity. If you're going to die by the sword, you're going to die by the sword. But I have marked you. Anybody got a mark on their forehead? We're looking for a real mark on our forehead? I've got a little bump there. Never mind. Yes, Gabe.
Just a little add on to that. My parents always told me Satan can tempt you, but he cannot take you.
Satan can tempt you, but he cannot take you. Okay? How are we tempted? Lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, pride of life. You know, we're led away by our own, what we see, those things. He's not going to come up and tap you on the shoulder and say, come on, come on. We're tempted. We're our own worst enemies in that. Absolutely. Yep. And when we know that resist the devil, and he will flee from you. We're told that. Wait till we get to the part where Satan has been bound for 1,000 years. But I digress. So we go back to Revelation chapter 6, and they cried out with a loud voice. Remember, these are the ones underneath the altar. They cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, until you judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? Then a white robe was given to each of them, and it was said to them that they should rest a little while longer until both the number of their fellow servants and their brethren who would be killed, as it were, was completed. When would that be completed? We're not given a date. But he says, you've got to rest. But there is a time when it's going to be completed, when I will take care of all of those who have persecuted you and killed you and have martyred you. Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth. When something comes up out of the earth, what are we talking about? Man or spirit? It's a man. When we see something coming out of the ocean, we're talking about empires and nations. It's a general rule, Old Testament, New Testament. I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon, and he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. Got to be the Antichrist, isn't it? And he's coming, he's already been, according to Hal Lindsey, he was already in existence in 1980. And the end of the world came in 1988. We're in the 1st century here. And you're going to see a comparison to here. Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth. He has 2 horns like a lamb, spoke like a... So we're given some indications. Remember, this is all symbolic. Are we looking for somebody, if we part their hair back and shave them, that there's going to be a little horn, little bump coming out of their head? Now, some people have these prosthetic surgeries to have those. Have you seen that? Eee. All right. He performs great signs so that he even makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he has granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. He was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, and the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as who would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. Sounds pretty scary, doesn't it? We have the second beast coming up out of the earth, 2 horns like a lamb, spoke like a dragon. He has all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. And that sounds very mysterious. And how would you ever figure this out? You could go back to Daniel, and really there's going to be a verse that's going to come into play here, but you'd have to know your history of Rome. That's how these people would know it. And that's why so many people are mixed up with this, because they don't understand the history of Rome. He causes both the small, and I read all of these, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on the right hand or on their foreheads, and that no one may buy and sell except one who has the mark of the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. His number is 666. So all these verses that we have read, from verse 18 back to verse 11, are all talking about one person or one entity. And his number is 666. Second Thessalonians, chapter 2 and verse 1. Paul is dealing with this issue that those in Thessalonica, and Paul writes this letter while he's on his, believe it's his 2nd missionary journey. So he's writing this back in the early 50s. And back then, the people were thinking, we have missed it. We have missed the Lord's second coming. So Paul has to go back and explain this to them. Now, brethren, concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our gathering together to him, we ask you not to be soon shaken in mind or troubled either by spirit or by word or by letter, as if from us, as though the day of the Christ has come. Let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless the falling away comes first, and the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Do you notice anything familiar here? He sounds an awful lot like the one we're reading about in Revelation chapter 13, doesn't it? He's opposed to God, exalts himself above what is God, or all that is called his worship, and he sits in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Coincidence? The first beast is Rome, the Roman Empire. The second beast is a religious guild that enforces the imperial cult or the emperor worship. How on earth would we know that? Wilma, how would we know that? Well, from the Old Testament, but we would also know that because history, this thing called history. This thing called history. And when you read history, you're going to read, let's see if I have that. The ancient guilds are like our modern unions. Is anybody here ever been a member of the union? Okay? You're a member of a union. What does a union do for you? Negotiate contracts. Oh, I had never heard that before. But unions are there to represent the workers. Now, we understand that in the modern sense, but we go back to these ancient guilds. And here is I believe this is a picture, it's a carving from ancient, and I believe it's the carpenters guild that's represented here, if you can see in the picture. Sorry, Katie, you won't be able to see this. But it's much like our modern unions, if you could relate to that. But there's a big difference in that the guilds required people to do things. And we had, if you can read this, the civil guilds could be social clubs, business clubs, legal clubs. They could even be a guild of criminals. Probably the mafia. There's nobody here in the mafia, is there? Turn the camera off. You have and a guild was also known as a collegia. Where do we know that word collegia from? College, okay? College is a gathering. Military collegia oversaw the general welfare of members of the military, from improving standards of living to covering expenses of burial, among others. Then we have the religious collegia, and that's what we're interested in. Is a guild is where interests lie. Where our interests lie. These were fraternities of priests formed to provide a number of religious functions in the empire. The four major, and you can find this in any history book on Rome. Any history book on Rome will tell you this exactly same thing. You had the pontifices. Anybody recognize the name pontifices? It's a pontiff. The pontiff, he was in charge of the guild, the augurs, the 15 members, and the last group there. Okay, that's all in Latin or Greek. Those were the four major religious guilds. The pontifices, they were the most powerful guild. This is important to know here, even though it seems like, man, I hate history. You'll love history when you understand this. It was the most powerful of the four main groups. Members of this were the highest ranking priests of the state religion. The Pontifex Maximus, sounds a lot like that movie, doesn't it? Was the highest ranking member. The emperor held this title beginning with Julius Caesar. I have a coin there, it's not on there. If that sounds familiar, it's a title given to the papacy in Roman Catholicism. Beginning with Augustus, only emperors could be Pontifex Maximus until Marcus Aurelius in 161 AD. So for a period of almost 200 years, only the emperor was Pontifex Maximus. Okay? These people held sway, and as a guild, you could not, remember when it talked about that mark, you could not become a member of the Carpenters Guild, the Masons Guild, not talking modern Masons, or any of these other guilds unless you could make sacrifices to their gods. And every guild had their god or gods. Now it makes sense, doesn't it? So this 666 person is the person who is the enforcer, who says, you can't do anything unless you sacrifice to the gods of Rome. Not talking 2,000 years into the future. These people would understand this. Read Paul's letters to the Romans, Paul's letter to the Corinthians, and to Rome. When he talks about, we know that idols are nothing. If you go to eat in someone's house and they serve meat, eat it without asking questions. But if you go in there and they say, Randy, this was sacrificed to the god Jupiter. What are you supposed to do, Randy? Not eat it. Paul's letters are dealing with what these people are dealing with in the book of Revelation is that they were required to make a sacrifice. Couldn't buy or sell. This is right out of the textbooks of Roman history in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd centuries. And it's only going to get worse after the 1st century. Here is the sacrificing a bull to Vespasian in Vespasian's temple in Pompeii. This was unearthed. They have these all over the place. I listened to a fellow talk. He had gone to the city of Corinth, and he said there were so many temples there that sacrificed to the Roman gods. He said you just couldn't believe it. It was one right after another of sacrificing to them. We really can't grasp that, can we? Anybody ever been to India? You know how many gods they have in India? I want to say that there are millions. I don't know if I got the number 30 million or 300 million. There are millions of gods there. If you're there during their festivals, you might get an idea of what they're dealing with in the 1st century in Rome, of sacrificing to these gods. But they said, if you're gonna be part of our guild, you got to sacrifice to the gods. What do you think happened to those who were Christians? They were in trouble. Absolutely. And Paul has to deal with this. That's why he spends that time writing to the church in Corinth about such things, because they are concerned about this. He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads. Now there's ideas of why is it the right hand or the forehead? Remember, this is symbolic. Why would it be the right hand? Your right hand might be that, because that's your dominant hand, might be the hand that you work with, representing your work. On your forehead might be the old thinker. You know, people have pondered that as to why the right hand and why the forehead. Literal, figurative. And since we don't have any people that are still alive from the 1st century to see, I wonder if that mark is still on their forehead. Remember, it's symbolic. Just as because if that mark is literal on them, then the mark has to be literal on those who have been marked by God as well. But they are symbolic. Tim?
A little fun fact about the right hand. A left-handed shakes hands with the right.
And a person shakes hands with the right. If they're in a cast, but yeah. Yep. Nero. People have spent an awful lot of time trying to figure out the 666. Nero comes pretty close to it, if you can do the numbers. Latinos, 666. Kissinger, Hitler, Ronald Wilson Reagan, because he has 6 letters in each name. Matthew French, if you can do that. You know, you can turn virtually anyone's name into 666 if you can do the math on it. So it really is futile to try to figure out, was it Nero? That's a pretty good guess. Does anybody here know for sure? Anybody receive a revelation or know somebody that did that told you, absolutely, I know who it is? You know, the top 2, they're probably, but the people in the 1st century would have known what this meant. Why? Because it was written to them. They're living this. The ditch digger, the stonemason, the guy who's just out growing crops, that's what this letter was written to. And it might be complicated to us, but it would be just as easy for us to understand if we're reading, you know, if I said history, we might say, well, I don't know, but if we're reading some sort of modern history, we'd say, oh, I knew that. Who's the first president of our country? Oh, we'd all know that's George Washington had a senior moment there. No. But we would know our modern history. This would have been easy for them to understand because they know if they receive the mark of the beast, they receive the mark in order to sell or buy, it's not good. This man is not someone in the 21st century. It is not the Antichrist. It is not the one world ruler of today. The 666 is a man or an organization, that guild the religious guild of the day. They were the ones that called the shots. They were the most important group of people as far as worshiping was in the first century for Rome. They said who and when you had to worship. Any questions? If you go to Reflections on Revelation, you can see this chapter, a lot more pictures and that put into it. It's a little bit longer. Chapter 4, other questions? Was it clear? Somewhat? Clear as mud? Okay. Chapter 14, the 144,000 and the message of the three angels. That's probably as far as we're going to get today. Chapter 14, verse 1 and 2. Then I looked, and behold, a Lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his Father's name written on their foreheads. Remember, we have just left those people who have the mark of the beast written on their foreheads. But now we see the 144,000, having his Father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven, like the voice of many waters, and like the voice of loud thunder. And I heard the sound of harpists playing their harps. Where have we seen this 144,000 before? It's only been 2 years since we started the book, so. Chapter 7, remember the 144,000. And I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel were sealed. And remember, there were 12,000 from each of the tribes. Can anybody remember which tribe was not in the 144,000? He has 3 letters in his name. Dan. Dan is in there. So if you think, oh, it has to be all of the Israel or Jews, well, remember, Dan's not in there. But be that as it may, it's represented. It is symbolic of all of those people. What's the difference and what are the similarities? The number 144,000 from chapter 7 to here, none were lost. In chapter 7, they are on earth being sealed before the great day of God's wrath. Being sealed before the Great Tribulation. And here in chapter 14, here they are before the throne. They made it through. Same amount of people, none have been lost. Then one of the elders answered and said to me, "Who are these arrayed in white robes? And where did they come from?" And I said, "Sir, you know." So he said, "These are the ones who come out of the Great Tribulation, and washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Therefore they are before the throne of God and serve him day and night in his temple. And he who sits on the throne will dwell among them. They shall neither hunger any more nor thirst any more. The sun shall not strike them nor any heat. For the Lamb who is in the midst of the throne will shepherd them and lead them to living fountains of water. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes." I have those in different colors because we often see that as the future. Is it the future? Or is it now? The temple. Where's the temple today? What does Paul say? 1 Corinthians 6:19. You are the temple where the Holy Spirit dwells. The church is the temple. There's a lot of doctrine in there that we might just gloss over without realizing, oh, I wonder what that means. Dwells among them. 2 Corinthians 6:16. Does God dwell among us? Yes. We don't have to wait to get to heaven for God to dwell among us, do we? What does the word Emmanuel mean? God's with us. Who is Emmanuel? Is Jesus among us today? Yeah. Aye. Never hunger or thirst. It's got to be talking about heaven, doesn't it? What did Jesus say in John chapter 6, verse 35? Have we drunk of the water of Christ? Yes. Yes, we have. And that's taken, this section is taken from Isaiah chapter 49, verse 10. Never hunger nor thirst. Not talking physical, are we? Because, I'm about ready to gnaw my arm off right now. I haven't eaten in nearly 2 hours. Never hunger or thirst. The Lamb will shepherd them. Peter says in 1 Peter chapter 2:25 that Christ is our shepherd leading us. He is the chief shepherd. Living fountains of water. Jesus goes to Jacob's well and he talks to the woman at the well. And he says, I'll give you water you'll never thirst again. And she says, give me that water. Has Christ given us that water? Yes. He says he will wipe away every tear. I don't know about you, but when I go to a funeral of a loved one, I still cry. But Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15:9, if all we have is this world, what are we? We're pitied. But our hope is beyond this. Doesn't say we won't have tears here, but he can wipe away our tears because we have a hope beyond this. So every identifying item there in Revelation chapter 7 about those 144,000, we have that too. We don't have to wait for heaven. We have it today. Oh, you can't see that one. Oh, that's what I just said. This is them in the first century, and it's us today as well. A lot to think about, isn't it? I heard a voice from heaven, like the voice of many waters, like the voice of thunder, and I heard the sound of harpists playing with harps. Katie, do you need someone to help you to the back? So here's in verse 2, he says, I hear a voice from heaven. And it's so, anybody ever been in the Marines? I have heard tell that the first day when you go into the Marines, or really any branch of the service, when you march, it sounds like a herd of cattle. By the time you're at the end, what does it sound like, Jack? One step and one sound. I heard a voice from heaven, like the voice of many waters, like the voice of loud thunder, and I heard the sound of harpists playing their harps. Three identifying things about these people. The voice of many waters. Anybody ever been to Niagara Falls? If you're standing by Niagara Falls, you better talk loud because the roar is so high you can't hear someone. Is that true? You heard a sound of two buzzers? It wasn't as loud as many waters. The voice of loud thunder. Anybody ever had lightning strike next to you? I actually had standing next to a tree, and I actually have the video of it playing, where the tree next to me got struck by lightning, and it knocked me to the ground. Great video, by the way. But a sound like thunder. The sound of harpists playing the harp. The noise isn't just noise. It has a melody, and it is recognizable as harmonious music. The sound like harps playing. It wasn't just a voice. It wasn't just a loud voice. It wasn't just a thunderous voice. But it was, what's the largest crowd you've ever been in that sang? Anybody ever been over 1,000 people singing? I was going to say, if you've ever been to a football game, you've heard tens of thousands of people. It might, yeah, I'd go with that. But we've been in places where people have sung loud. Now, people sing the national anthem at a ball game. They're not really singing. But if you've been places where everybody is absolutely just, as I call it, tearing out a tonsil, singing, you really hear it, don't you? And that's what's going on here. It has a melody to it. And it says, they sang as it were a new song before the throne, before the four living creatures and the elders. And no one could learn that song except the 144,000 who were redeemed from the earth. Do I dare go 3 more minutes? Or we'll stop? Stop? Stop. Okay. Rush it? All right. Do not. Don't rush through it. Okay, never mind. Okay. Look at that. 3 verses today. We're killing it.